Have you ever wondered what goes on behind the closed doors of a seemingly perfect marriage? What happens when a man blinded by ego and desire trades his devoted, quiet wife for the fleeting glamour of a model? He thought he was upgrading, chasing a life of excitement he believed he deserved. He saw his wife Amelia as simple, predictable, a comfortable fixture in the background of his ascending life. He was wrong. He wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was failing a test he never knew was set. And he was about to find out that the quiet woman watering her plants in their suburban home was playing a different game entirely, a game worth billions. Liam Sterling considered his life to be a masterpiece of his own creation. At 34, he was a senior marketing director at a top-tier firm in Manhattan, his reflection gleaming back at him from the polished chrome of his office building. He had the sharp jawline, the tailored suits, and the confident stride of a man who believed the world owed him its attention. And he had the perfect wife, Amelia. Amelia was his anchor, or so he told his friends. They'd met in college, a whirlwind romance between the charismatic business major and the quiet, brilliant literature student. 5 years into their marriage, she remained an enigma. He felt he had solved, then shelved. She was beautiful in an understated way, with soft brown hair, she often tied back, and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without comment. She ran their pristine home in Westchester with an efficiency that was both admirable and, to Liam, a little boring. Her days were a gentle rhythm of gardening, reading dense novels, managing their finances with what he assumed was basic proficiency, and preparing meals that were always healthy and on time. She was quiet. That was the word everyone used for Amelia. Quiet, sweet, dependable. For Liam, that quietness had slowly curdled from a peaceful haven into a silent reproach when he'd come home buzzing from a successful pitch or a round of drinks with clients. Her calm presence felt like a glass of water when what he craved was champagne. You wouldn't believe the energy in the room today. Ames, he'd say, loosening his tie. I'm sure you were brilliant, she'd reply, her voice soft, her eyes not leaving the page of her book. It was a genuine compliment, but to Liam it sounded like a line read from a script titled The Supportive Wife. He wanted fanfare excitement, a partner who mirrored his own ambition. The cracks in their marriage weren't loud fissures. They were silent hairline fractures spreading beneath the surface. He started staying out later, disguising client dinners as thinly veiled nights out with his sycophantic junior colleague Mark. He bought a new sports car, a sleek, aggressive machine that looked out of place in their tranquil, tree-lined driveway. Isn't it a bit much, Liam? Amelia had asked her. Hand stroking the polished hood, her touch gentle, almost diagnostic. You have to look the part, Ames. It's about projecting success. He'd retorted, snatching the keys as if she might disapprove them into malfunctioning. He didn't tell her he'd financed it through a secondary loan, keeping it separate from their main accounts that she so meticulously managed. It was his first significant financial secret. The test, as Amelia would later call it in her own mind, wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny observations. The way Liam's eyes would flick to his phone when he thought she wasn't looking, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his suit jacket, the growing emotional chasm between them. For their 5th anniversary, she had planned a trip to a quiet villa in Tuscany. He had cancelled at the last minute. A massive campaign just dropped in my lap, Amelia. It's a game changer. The kind of thing that gets you a corner office. You understand, right? She had understood perfectly. She'd cancelled the villa, her voice even and calm on the phone with the travel agent. But as she hung up, a cold resolve settled in her heart. She loved Liam, or at least she loved the man he had been. But she could no longer ignore the man he was becoming. She decided it was time to know for sure. It was time for a stress test, not on a financial portfolio, but on the very foundation of her life. Amelia Vance Sterling wasn't just a quiet literature major. That was only a sliver of her identity. The world knew of her maternal grandmother, Eleanor Vance, as a reclusive, eccentric heiress who had passed away years ago, leaving behind a fortune so vast it was spoken of in whispers. What the world didn't know was that Eleanor had bypassed her own children, leaving the entirety of the Vance estate, a multi-billion-dollar empire of tech stocks, real estate holdings, and private equity to her quiet, observant granddaughter. Amelia had spent her 20s not just reading literature, but learning from the sharpest financial minds her grandmother's estate could employ. Under the guidance of Arthur Finch, the family's old guard lawyer and her trusted confidant, she had not just maintained her inheritance, she had more than doubled it with a series of audacious and brilliantly timed investments. She had a mind like a steel trap, and an instinct for market trends that was nothing short of prodigious. She lived a simple life because she valued anonymity above all else, a lesson learned from her grandmother's hounded existence. Liam knew none of this. He thought her family had some old money, which to him meant a comfortable trust fund that paid for their down payment and her lack of a real job. He had no concept of the scale. The instrument of her test arrived a week after their cancelled anniversary. It came in the form of a casting call for a new luxury watch campaign Liam's firm was heading. The brand wanted a face that was both aspirational and alluring. Amelia, through a holding company that owned a stake in the parent corporation of Liam's firm, made a suggestion. More than a suggestion, really. She had Arthur subtly pull the strings. Isabella Dubois was chosen. She was everything Amelia was not. Tall, with legs that seemed to start at her collarbone, a mane of platinum blonde hair, and a pout that had graced the covers of several European magazines. She exuded a raw, almost feral ambition. She was a weapon, and Amelia aimed her directly at the weakest point in her husband's armor, his ego. Liam was instantly captivated. He was assigned to personally oversee the campaign, a task he took to with religious fervor. This model, Isabella. She's incredible, he told Amelia one night, scrolling through photos on his phone, ostensibly for work. She just gets the brand. She's electric. Amelia glanced over his shoulder, her expression placid. She's very striking. The first phase of the affair was a textbook cliché. It started with late-night strategy sessions at chic hotel bars, their knees brushing under the table. It moved to flirtatious texts filled with inside jokes that excluded Amelia. Liam felt a thrill he hadn't felt in years. Isabella's admiration was a drug. She hung on his every word about marketing demographics and brand synergy, making him feel like the most powerful man in the room. You're wasted on your current role, Liam. She'd purr, her fingers tracing the rim of her martini glass. A man with your vision should be running his own agency. He would come home to Amelia, who would be reading in the living room, a cup of herbal tea steaming beside her. The scent of her chamomile was a stark contrast to the expensive perfume Isabella wore. The quiet of the house felt deafening after the buzz of the city. How was your day, honey? Amelia would ask. Busy. You know he'd reply, his answers becoming shorter, more evasive. The first time he slept with Isabella, he was a storm of guilt and exhilaration. He showered at the hotel, scrubbing her scent from his skin, and crept into his marital bed at 2 a.m. Amelia didn't stir. He lay there in the darkness, his heart pounding, staring at the woman beside him. She looked so peaceful, so unsuspecting. For a moment, a wave of real gut-wrenching shame washed over him. He was betraying this good, kind woman. But then his ego whispered back. He deserved this. He deserved to feel alive. Amelia, in her quiet world, could never understand the pressures he was under, the temptations he faced. He rolled over his back to her and fell into a troubled sleep, dreaming of flashing cameras and a blonde-haired woman who told him he was a king. Across the city, in a discreet office overlooking Bryant Park, Amelia was on a video call with Arthur Finch. Her face, illuminated by the glow of the screen, was not that of a placid housewife. It was sharp, focused, and cold. The initial contact has been made, Arthur. He's taken the bait. Arthur, a man in his late 60s with kind eyes that had seen too much, sighed softly. Amelia, are you certain you want to proceed? There are less elaborate ways to handle this. He had a choice, Arthur. He has a choice every single day. She said, her voice devoid of its usual softness. I need to know the truth of his character, not just the fact of his infidelity. I need to see how far he will go. Activate, Mr. Harrison. I want everything documented. Every dinner, every hotel, every lie. I want a complete picture. Very well, Arthur said. Consider it done. Amelia ended the call and looked out at the city lights. She felt a profound sadness, a mourning for the marriage she thought she had. But beneath the grief, something else was hardening resolve. She was no longer just Amelia Sterling, the quiet wife. She was Amelia Vance, and she was about to take control of the narrative. The test had begun. The affair between Liam and Isabella escalated from a spark to a bonfire. Manhattan became their playground. Liam, fueled by a desperate need to impress, lived a life far beyond his actual means. He took Isabella to restaurants where the water cost more than the wine he and Amelia used to share, places like Per Se, and Daniel securing reservations through what he claimed were high-level contacts, but were actually frantic calls to his Amex concierge. He bought her gifts, a Cartier bracelet, a pair of Louboutin heels, items that made his secret credit card groan under the strain. You spoil me, Liam. Isabella would say, her voice a husky whisper, as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist in the back of a taxi. The flash of the diamonds seemed to illuminate the hunger in her eyes. Nothing's too good for my star, he'd reply, his chest puffing out. He was no longer just a marketing director. In these moments he was a patron, a mogul, a man of substance. He constructed an elaborate scaffold of lies to support his double life. A marketing summit in Chicago was a weekend with Isabella at a boutique hotel in the Hamptons. A late-night crisis with the London office was a frantic, passionate encounter in Isabella's sleek, minimalist apartment in Soho. He became a master of subterfuge, keeping a separate gym bag in his car, with fresh clothes, using burner apps to communicate with her, and paying for everything in cash or on his hidden credit card. His behavior at home became increasingly erratic. He was either overly solicitous, buying Amelia flowers for no reason, out of a transparent sense of guilt, or he was irritable and distant, snapping at her for minor things. Why do you always organize my books by color? It's absurd. It should be alphabetical, he once barked, gesturing at a beautifully arranged shelf. Amelia looked up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. I thought it looked nice. I can change it if you'd like. No, forget it. It doesn't matter, he muttered, retreating to his study. He couldn't stand her calmness. It felt like judgment. He wanted a reaction, a fight, something to justify his actions. But Amelia gave him nothing. She remained the serene, predictable wife, a fixed point in his chaotic new universe. He mistook her silence for ignorance, her patience for weakness. In reality, Amelia was anything but ignorant. While Liam was weaving his web of lies, she was meticulously building her net of truth. The man Arthur had activated, Mr. Harrison, was the best private investigator money could buy. He was a former MI6 agent, a ghost who specialized in discreet surveillance for the world's elite. His reports arrived daily in a double-encrypted file to Amelia's secure server. They were brutally detailed. High-resolution photographs of Liam and Isabella kissing outside a restaurant, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the streetlights. Audio recordings of their conversations in public places. Liam's boasts and Isabella's encouraging murmurs, captured with chilling clarity. Copies of hotel folios, credit card statements from Liam's secret account, even flight manifests. Amelia would review the evidence in her private study, a room Liam thought was for her hobby of genealogical research. The walls were lined not with family trees, but with state-of-the-art monitors and secure communication systems. As she watched a video of Liam whispering in Isabella's ear on a hotel balcony overlooking Central Park, she felt a strange detachment. The man on the screen was a stranger. The raw, visceral pain of betrayal had begun to cool, replaced by a surgeon's dispassionate focus. She was observing a subject collecting data for a conclusion that was becoming more inevitable with each passing day. One evening, Liam came home smelling of wine and Isabella's Chanel No. 5. He found Amelia in the kitchen preparing a salmon dish, the scent of dill and lemon filling the air. Rough day. He sighed, slumping into a chair. This campaign is killing me. You should take some time off after it's done, Amelia said, not looking at him. We could finally take that trip to Tuscany. Liam froze. The casual mention of the trip he'd so carelessly discarded felt like a stone in his gut. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. He watched her move around the kitchen, her movements fluid and efficient. A sudden paranoid thought pierced through his wine-fueled haze. Could she know? Was this a trap? He studied her face for any sign of suspicion, any hint of anger. He found none. There was only the calm, gentle mask she always wore. He relaxed. He was being foolish. Amelia was simple. Her world was this house, this garden, these books. She couldn't possibly imagine the complexities of his life. The biggest twist in the surveillance came from an unexpected source. Mr. Harrison's report included a background check on Isabella Dubois. On the surface, she was, as advertised, a moderately successful model from France, trying to make it big in the US. But digging deeper, Harrison found something interesting. Before coming to New York, Isabella had been involved with a European financier who had been a fierce and ultimately unsuccessful rival to one of Amelia's most profitable tech acquisitions. The financier had been financially ruined. It was a tenuous link, but a link nonetheless. Amelia stared at the report on her screen. Was it possible? Was Isabella not just an opportunistic model, but a vengeful proxy, or was it a mere coincidence? She filed the information away. It was another variable in an already complex equation. The financial strain on Liam was beginning to show. To maintain the illusion of wealth for Isabella, he'd done something incredibly stupid. He had attempted to leverage his position at the firm to secure a personal loan from one of their banking partners, citing a private investment opportunity. The bank, which was a subsidiary of a larger financial institution in which Amelia's Vance Corporation held a majority stake, flagged the request. The flag went directly to Arthur Finch's desk. He called Amelia immediately. "He's getting desperate, Amelia. He's trying to take out a $250,000 unsecured loan against his corporate standing." Amelia felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This was a new level of deceit, one that crossed from the personal to the professional. He was using the reputation of a company she partly owned to fund an affair designed to humiliate her. "Deny it, Arthur," she said, her voice like ice. "Cite unacceptable risk. Let the rejection come from the bank's official channels. I don't want him to have any idea we are connected." "Consider it done," Arthur replied. "The net is closing, my dear." 2 days later, Liam was in a foul mood. He stormed into the house, throwing his briefcase onto the floor. "What's wrong?" Amelia asked, looking up from the rose bushes she was tending in the garden. "Freaking banks! Useless, risk-averse idiots," he spat. "I had a brilliant investment lined up, a real chance to build something of my own, and they pulled the plug. They don't know how to recognize real vision." He was looking for sympathy, for validation. He wanted her to rail against the unfairness of the world with him. Amelia simply looked at him, her gardening gloves covered in soil. She thought of the intricate network of financial systems. She commanded the teams of analysts who modeled risk for her, the global flow of capital she could redirect with a single email. And here was her husband, furious, because a bank she controlled wouldn't give him a loan to impress his mistress. The absurdity of it was almost comical. "Well," she said, her voice even, "perhaps it's for the best. Big risks don't always pay off." Her placid response infuriated him. "What would you know about risk?" "The biggest risk you take all day is whether to plant tulips or daffodils. I'm out there in the real world, Amelia making things happen." It was the ultimate condescension, the final unwitting insult. He had no idea he was speaking to the very architect of his present frustration. That night, Mr. Harrison sent his final report. It was a single file containing a video. The timestamp was from that afternoon. It showed Liam and Isabella in a heated argument in his car, after he had evidently told her about the failed loan. "What do you mean you can't get the money?" Isabella's voice was sharp, stripped of its usual purr. "You told me you were a major player, Liam. It's a temporary setback." "The deal is solid," he insisted, his voice pleading. "I'm not betting my future on a temporary setback," she sneered. "You told me you could finance a new life for us away from your boring little wife. Was that all just talk? Because I have other offers, you know. Real ones." Amelia watched the video twice. She saw the desperation in her husband's eyes and the cold transactional calculation in Isabella's. The test was over. The results were in. The data was complete and damning. She closed her laptop and walked over to the large picture window in her study, looking out at the quiet, sleeping street. Her quiet, sleeping street. Her quiet, sleeping life. It was all about to end. The silence was about to break. The storm broke on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, which was precisely the point. Amelia wanted the confrontation to happen not in the heat of a dramatic discovery, but in the cold, mundane reality of the life Liam had taken for granted. He came home just after 7, loosening his tie, as he walked through the door, the familiar ritual of a man returning to his sanctuary. He found Amelia in the living room. The space, usually warm and inviting with soft lighting and the scent of books, felt different tonight. It was stark, sterile. The lights were brighter than usual, and the coffee table, normally adorned with art books and a vase of flowers, was completely bare except for a single thick manila file. "Hey, Liam," said, dropping his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "What's for dinner? I'm starving." Amelia didn't answer. She was standing by the fireplace, dressed not in her usual soft cashmere sweater and jeans, but in a sharply tailored black dress. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked like a CEO, not a housewife. Liam felt a prickle of unease. "Ames. Everything okay?" "Sit down, Liam," she said. Her voice was the one she used on conference calls with her board of directors, calm, clear, and non-negotiable. He hesitated, then gave a short, nervous laugh. "Okay. This feels serious. Did I forget an anniversary or something?" He walked over and made to kiss her cheek. She turned her head slightly, and his lips met the air. The rejection was small but absolute. Now, genuinely unnerved, he sat on the edge of the sofa, his eyes flicking to the file on the table. "What's that?" That Amelia said. "Moving to stand opposite him is a comprehensive summary of your life for the past 3 months. It's quite the read, full of drama, intrigue, high-stakes finance, all the things you believe I wouldn't understand." Liam's blood ran cold. He stared at her, his mind racing. This was it. She knew. But how? And how much? His first instinct was to deny, to deflect. "What are you talking about? Are you on new medication? You're acting strange." Amelia's expression didn't flicker. "Don't insult my intelligence, Liam. It's the one thing I have left that you haven't tried to trample on." She reached down, her movements deliberate, and opened the file. She slid the top photograph across the polished surface of the table. It was a picture of him and Isabella, laughing as they fed each other dessert at a restaurant. It was clear, high resolution, undeniable. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. She slid another one. Him and Isabella kissing, silhouetted against the window of her Soho apartment. Another. The two of them checking into a hotel in the Hamptons on the weekend of the Chicago summit. I can explain." He stammered, his mind a frantic scramble for a plausible lie. There was none. Ames, it was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. I was under so much pressure at work, and She doesn't mean anything to me. You are my wife. I love you. Love. Amelia's voice was quiet, but it cut through his pathetic excuses like a razor. You talk about love, but you don't even know the meaning of respect. For months you have treated me like a fool. You have lied to my face every single day. You have spent money we don't have, money you borrowed to impress a woman who, according to this transcript, she tapped a document, sees you as nothing more than a stepping stone. Liam flinched, as if struck. You have transcripts. What is this? Did you hire someone? You're spying on me. The indignation in his voice was galling, the last defense of a man with no ground to stand on. I took measures to protect my assets, Amelia said coldly. You, Liam, were my primary asset, and I needed to know if my investment had failed. It has. He finally broke. The arrogant facade crumbled, replaced by a desperate, pleading panic. He got off the sofa and knelt before her, grabbing her hands. They were cold and unresponsive in his. Amelia, please, don't do this. I'll end it. I'll never speak to her again. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. We can fix this. Think of everything we've built together, this house, our life. He looked around the beautiful room, the symbol of his success, and that's when he made his final fatal error. His desperation curdled back into a sneer of resentment. What will you do without me? Huh? I pay for all of this. This lifestyle, he spat, his voice rising. You think it's easy. You live in your little bubble with your books and your garden, while I'm out there fighting in the real world to provide for you. I made a mistake, yes. But what can you offer? You're just... you. Isabella. She has ambition. She's going places. She understands me. He had finally said it. The ugly, festering belief that had driven his betrayal, that he was the engine of their life, and she was just a passenger. Amelia slowly pulled her hands from his grasp. She looked down at him, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like pity. The test was over, but the results needed to be published. You're right, Liam, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It's time you understood what I can offer. She walked over to her purse, took out her phone and dialed a number. She put it on speakerphone, the ringing echoing in the silent room. Arthur Finch speaking. The voice was old, crisp and authoritative. Arthur. It's Amelia, she said. I'm here with Liam. I'm afraid the portfolio assessment is complete. The asset has proven to be a total liability. I need you to begin the liquidation process immediately. Liam, still on his knees, looked up in utter confusion. Portfolio asset. What is this, some kind of weird therapy role play? Arthur. Amelia continued, ignoring him. Please start with the primary residence in Westchester. It's held under the Vance Holding Company, so it should be straightforward. Please also repossess the vehicle, the Audi R8. It's also registered to the company. And would you mind freezing the Sterling Vance joint accounts? I'll be moving my funds to a private account. Oh, and please draft the divorce papers. The grounds will be infidelity. We have ample evidence. Liam scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Vance Holding Company. What are you talking about? This is my house. My car, no, Liam, Amelia said, turning to face him fully. The quiet wife was gone. In her place stood a woman of immense power. It was never your house, or your car. It was all mine. A loan, you might say, contingent on certain performance metrics. Loyalty, for example. She let the words hang in the air. Liam's brain was short-circuiting. Vance, like your grandmother Eleanor. Vance. I thought she just left you some money. A small, mirthless smile touched Amelia's lips. She did. She left me all of it. The entire Vance fortune. The tech companies, the real estate empire, the seat on the board of the bank that so wisely denied your loan application last week. I am not just a quiet wife, Liam. I am a very, very quiet billionaire. The color drained from Liam's face. He stumbled backwards, his hand reaching out for the sofa to steady himself. He looked at Amelia, as if seeing her for the first time. The quietness he had mistaken for simplicity was the calm of absolute power. The books she read weren't just novels. They were financial reports and market analyses. The time she spent in her study wasn't a hobby. It was the management of an empire. He thought of every condescending remark, every patronizing pat on the head, every time he'd dismissed her opinion. He had been cheating on his wife with a model, thinking he was trading up. He had just discovered he'd traded a kingdom for a handful of sand. I didn't know he whispered the words, sounding pathetic, even to his own ears. That Amelia said, disconnecting the call with Arthur, is the entire point. I wanted a partner who valued me, Amelia, not a man who would one day value my bank account. I gave you the realest version of myself I could, and you proved you were not worthy of her." She walked towards the hallway. "A courier will deliver the preliminary divorce settlement to you tomorrow. You have 24 hours to vacate my property. I suggest you call a friend." With that, she turned and walked up the stairs, her back straight, leaving Liam Sterling standing alone in the bright, unforgiving light of the living room, the ruins of his life scattered around him in a single, devastating file. The fallout was not a slow decline. It was a detonation. Liam's world disintegrated with terrifying speed. He spent the first night in a daze, numbly packing a suitcase, while Amelia remained sequestered in the master suite, the door firmly closed. The house, which had been his castle, now felt alien and menacing. Every object, the Eames chair he'd coveted, the abstract painting he'd chosen, seemed to mock him, reminding him that it had never truly been his. The next morning, the first tangible consequence arrived. He walked out to the driveway to find a flatbed truck hooking up his beloved Audi R8. A man in a jumpsuit handed him a form to sign. "Repossession order from Vance Holding Company," the man said gruffly, not making eye contact. Liam watched humiliated as his symbol of power and success was unceremoniously hauled away down the tranquil suburban street. He tried to use his credit card to book a hotel room. Declined. He tried another. Declined. He logged into his online banking app and saw the joint account his salary automatically deposited there for years now read $0. A transfer of the exact full amount to a private account had been executed at 9:01 a.m. He was financially neutered. Swallowing his pride, he called his friend Mark, the same colleague who had been his wingman and cheerleader during the affair. "Mark, I'm in deep trouble. Amelia knows everything. She's kicking me out," Liam said, his voice cracking. "Whoa, slow down," Mark said, a note of caution in his voice. "What do you mean she knows?" "She knows everything. She had me investigated. And Mark, she's rich. Not like nice house rich. She's a billionaire, the whole Vance fortune." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Liam could almost hear the gears turning in Mark's head, calculating, recalibrating. "A billionaire?" "You're joking." "Do I sound like I'm joking? My car just got towed and my bank account is empty. I have nowhere to go." "Listen, man, I can't get involved," Mark said, his voice suddenly distant. "My wife is friends with Amelia's cousin, you know. This is messy. I could front you a few $100, I guess. But I can't have you staying here. It's a bad look." Liam hung up the phone. The betrayal, a bitter pill. His friends, his entire social circle had been built on the foundation of his perceived success. Now that the foundation was gone, so were they. Desperate and broken, he took an Uber to the only place he could think of Isabella's apartment in Soho. He buzzed, and after a long moment her voice came through the intercom, sharp and impatient. "Yes, it's me, Liam. Let me up. Please, I need to see you." He heard a sigh, then the click of the lock. He found her in a silk robe, sipping an espresso, looking annoyed. Her apartment, which had once seemed like a sexy minimalist sanctuary, now felt cold and impersonal. "What do you want, Liam?" "I'm in the middle of a fitting." He poured out the whole sordid story. The confrontation, Amelia's hidden identity, the repossession, the empty bank account. He told it with the desperate hope that she would see them as partners against the world, a Bonnie and Clyde wronged by a deceptive heiress. He expected sympathy outrage on his behalf, an embrace. Isabella listened, her expression shifting from impatience to a kind of detached, clinical interest. When he was done, she took a slow sip of her espresso. "A billionaire," she said, a strange glint in her eye. She played that very well. "I'm almost impressed." "Impressed, Isabella. She ruined me." "But it doesn't matter. We can be together now. We can start over. We just need to be smart." Isabella let out a short, sharp laugh that was completely devoid of humor. "We, Liam, there is no we. You must have misunderstood the nature of our arrangement." "Arrangement," he choked out. I thought we had something real." "What we had was a transaction," she said, standing up and tightening her robe. "I provided you with an escape, an ego boost. You were supposed to provide me with a platform, access, a lifestyle. Your value was tied to your position and your perceived wealth. Now," she gestured at his rumpled suit and desperate eyes, "your stock has crashed. I don't invest in failing assets." The cold corporate language was a brutal echo of Amelia's own words. He suddenly saw it all with sickening clarity. He hadn't been a king in this scenario. He had been a mark. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew she had money." Isabella shrugged. "I didn't know the scale, no. But one learns to spot the signs. The way you were so desperate to prove yourself, the carelessness with which you spent money, you clearly didn't have. It screamed insecurity. And powerful insecurity is often tethered to a wealthy, powerful spouse. I just assumed she was some passive trust fund wife. The billionaire part is a nice twist." She smiled, a cruel, beautiful slash of red lips. "Now, if you'll excuse me. My stylist is here. Don't call me again." She walked him to the door as if he were a delivery person. The final humiliation. He was left standing in the hallway of the trendy building, a pariah in a world he had tried so desperately to conquer. Meanwhile, Amelia's transformation was becoming public. 2 weeks after kicking Liam out, an exclusive feature story, brokered by Arthur Finch, ran in Forbes. The Ghost of Wall Street. How Eleanor Vance's secretive granddaughter Amelia Vance quietly built a modern empire. The article was a sensation. It featured a stunning photograph of Amelia, not in her garden, but in the boardroom of Vance Tower, looking poised, powerful, and utterly in command. The story detailed her Midas touch with investments, her strategic philanthropy, and her deliberate choice to live a life of anonymity. It painted her as a brilliant, enigmatic figure, the very opposite of the flashy, self-promoting billionaires of the age. The news ripped through their social and professional circles like a shockwave. At Liam's old firm, where he had been fired for gross misconduct and misrepresentation of company assets, a charge neatly orchestrated by Amelia's legal team, the gossip was seismic. The quiet, mousy wife they'd seen at holiday parties was one of the most powerful women in the country. Liam Sterling wasn't a charismatic leader. He was the world's biggest fool. Liam saw the magazine cover on a newsstand while walking to a temp agency. He looked at the picture of his wife, and felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. The woman on that cover was a stranger, a titan, and he had complained to her that she didn't understand risk because she planted tulips. He had told this woman she would be nothing without him. His downfall was as complete as her ascent was spectacular. Weighed down by the debt from his secret credit card and the loan he had co-signed with Mark, who was now demanding repayment with menacing legal letters, he was forced into bankruptcy. He moved into a dingy furnished room in Queens, the kind of place with a lingering smell of cigarettes and despair. He got a job working in the stockroom of a large department store, a physically demanding anonymous job that paid just enough to cover his rent and cheap meals. He was haunted by her. He'd see her face on the news announcing a new clean energy initiative. He'd hear her name on the radio being lauded for endowing a university chair. She was everywhere, a constant, shimmering reminder of the life, the love, and the staggering fortune he had thrown away for a fleeting affair with a model who had played him for a fool. He had cheated on the sun, not realizing he was just a moth drawn to a cheap, glittering bulb. 6 months bled into one another each day, a grey copy of the last. For Liam, this half-year was a descent into a new kind of reality, one stripped of all its former gloss. His world had shrunk to the 4 peeling walls of a studio apartment in a far-flung corner of Queens, a room that always smelled faintly of damp and the previous tenant's cigarettes. The sirens of the city, once a soundtrack to his ambition, were now just a reminder of the relentless, indifferent churn of life outside his window. His hands, which had once gestured confidently in boardrooms and signed for $1,000 dinners, were now raw and calloused. He worked in the cavernous, fluorescent-lit stockroom of a major midtown department store. The job was brutally physical and blessedly anonymous. He was a body, a pair of hands to lift and move heavy boxes from trucks to shelves. He learned the rhythm of it, the ache in his lower back by noon, the grit of dust under his fingernails, the bone-deep weariness at the end of a 10-hour shift. He'd ride the subway home, lost in the sea of tired faces, a ghost in a city that had once been his kingdom. He was haunted by Amelia. Her success was a parallel universe he was forced to witness. He'd see her on the cover of Time magazine at a newsstand, her gaze confident and direct, and he'd have to physically turn away, a hot spike of shame driving into his gut. He'd hear her voice on a podcast playing from a passing car, discussing global economic trends with an easy brilliance that made his own past boasts seem like the babbling of a child. He learned to avoid certain channels, to flip past newspapers quickly. But she was inescapable. She was the woman who had shared his bed, the woman he had patronized and dismissed, and now she was a titan. The dissonance was a constant low-grade torture. His anger had long since burned out, leaving behind the cold, heavy ash of regret. In the lonely silence of his apartment, he would replay their life together, but with new eyes. He saw the quiet evenings not as boring, but as peaceful. He saw her patient questions not as a lack of engagement, but as a genuine attempt to connect with a man who was already pulling away. He remembered the time he'd mocked her for reading a dense book on quantum mechanics, saying, "Leave the big thoughts to the professionals." Ames. He cringed at the memory, now the arrogance of it so staggering it made him physically ill. He hadn't just been a cheater. He had been a fool, willfully blind to the diamond he held in his hand, because he was too busy looking for shiny pieces of glass. For Amelia, these 6 months were a renaissance. Shedding the protective skin of her quiet life had been daunting at first, but she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The world, it turned out, was fascinated by the story of the billionaire ghost. But they were more impressed by the woman herself. She was not just the inheritor of a fortune. She was its brilliant steward and its visionary future. She moved through the world with a new grace, her innate intelligence now paired with a public confidence that was both disarming and formidable. The sadness over her failed marriage remained a fine scar on her heart, but it no longer defined her. It was a lesson paid for at great cost that had ultimately liberated her. She was complete on her own. The final crushing intersection of their two worlds was orchestrated by the cruel hand of fate on a frigid November evening. The Vance Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic calendar. It was an evening of breathtaking opulence, where titans of industry mingled with Oscar-winning actors and world-renowned artists, all gathered to support the causes Amelia now championed. She was the evening's host, its radiant center of gravity. Liam was there too. His temp agency, which specialized in providing anonymous labor for high-end events, had assigned him to the catering staff. The irony was so profound, it was almost surreal. A year ago, he would have been scheming for a ticket. Now he was being handed a cheap, ill-fitting black tuxedo and told not to make eye contact with the guests. Walking through the service entrance of the Met felt like passing through a portal into a life that was no longer his. He moved through the great hall, a tray of champagne flutes balanced on his hand. His head bowed. The air buzzed with power and perfume. He saw faces he recognized from the society pages and worse faces he knew personally. He saw his old boss, the CEO of his former firm, laughing with a senator. He saw Mark, his treacherous ex-friend, standing with his wife, both of them looking sleek and successful. They didn't see him. He was just part of the machinery that made their world run smoothly, as invisible as a chair or a tablecloth. And then his eyes found her. Amelia was standing at the foot of the grand staircase greeting guests. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that seemed to capture and refract all the light in the room. She was listening intently to an elderly gentleman, her head tilted with the same grace he remembered from when she'd listened to him recount his day at the office. But the context was shatteringly different. The power she commanded was palpable. She was not just in her element. She was the element. He felt a wave of vertigo so intense he had to steady himself against a pillar. He tried to retreat, to melt into the background, but his nerves were shot. As he turned, a guest, oblivious, stepped backwards, directly into his path. Liam stumbled his arm, jolting. The tray tilted, and in what felt like slow motion, a dozen crystal champagne flutes slid and then crashed onto the marble floor. The sound was a bomb detonating in the cathedral-like space. The symphony of conversations ceased instantly. 100 heads, 100 pairs of eyes, all turned to stare at the source of the disruption. They saw a clumsy waiter, his face pale with horror, standing amidst a wreck of shattered glass and spreading champagne. And across that suddenly silent, gaping hall, his eyes locked with Amelia's. For a long, agonizing second, the world seemed to stop. He saw recognition dawn in her eyes, followed by a complex cascade of emotions he couldn't begin to decipher. There was no shock, no anger. He saw a flicker of the woman who once loved him, a shadow of shared history, immediately overlaid by a profound, sorrowful distance. It was the look one might give a ghost from a past life. The spell was broken by a flurry of activity. A supervisor rushed over, hissing at Liam. Security guards began cordoning off the area. The buzz of conversation slowly resumed the incident already becoming an anecdote. But the connection had been made. The chasm between their two realities had been illuminated in one mortifying flash of light. Much later, his shift over Liam was carrying a heavy tub of dirty linens toward the service exit, his spirit completely broken. Liam. The voice was quiet, but it cut through the clatter from the kitchens. He froze, then slowly turned. Amelia was standing there a few feet away, having slipped away from the dazzling party. Her security detail lingered at a respectful distance down the cold concrete corridor. Away from the lights and the crowd, she looked more real, more like the woman he remembered. Amelia, he breathed. His mind was a maelstrom of shame and regret. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she said, her voice even. She pulled her wrap tighter around her shoulders, a gesture against the corridor's chill. But he had to. It was the only thing he had left. I'm sorry. He began the words, feeling pitifully inadequate. Not just for what I did, but for who I was. For being so arrogant, so blind. I looked at you every day, and I never ever saw you. She listened, her expression unreadable, but her gaze unwavering. No, you didn't, she agreed, the statement a simple fact, not an accusation. You saw what you wanted to see. A comfortable, simple woman who made your life easy. You saw a backdrop for the life you thought you were building. You failed to realize she was the entire landscape. He flinched at the truth of it. I was a fool, chasing something shiny. You were, she said, and for the first time a note of deep sadness entered her voice. But you still don't understand the full truth of it. Do you this? She gestured back towards the noise and glamour of the gala, this fortune, the power. This was never the ultimate prize. It was just a circumstance of my birth. The real prize, Liam, was my love, my loyalty, my faith in you. It was me showing up every day, choosing you, believing in the man I thought you were. That was the treasure. And you traded it for what? A fleeting illusion, with a woman who valued you even less than you valued me. He had no answer. He could only stare at the scuffed toes of his cheap shoes, the full weight of his failure crushing him. I don't hate you, Liam, she said, and her voice softened, becoming the voice of the woman who had once nursed him through the flu. I'm long past that. I feel a great sorrow for the man who had a kingdom in his hands and let it slip through his fingers because he was too busy counting pebbles on the beach. She took a small step back. I truly hope you find a way to rebuild your life, a real life. I hope you learn to see the value in things and in people before they're gone. She gave him one last lingering look, a final farewell to the man he had been and the future they would never have. Then she turned, her emerald gown rustling softly, and walked back toward the light rejoining her world, leaving him alone in his. Liam stood motionless in the service corridor for a long time. Then he pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped out into the biting cold of the New York night. The city air felt sharp and clean in his lungs. He was nothing. He was no one, and in that moment, for the first time in his life, he was utterly and completely free of his own suffocating ego. He was just a man stripped of everything but the consequences starting the long walk home. Liam's story is a dramatic and cautionary tale, but at its heart, it's about the incredible power of self-worth and the consequences of taking those we love for granted. Amelia wasn't just a woman with a secret fortune. She was a woman who knew her own value, even when the person closest to her refused to see it. Her journey wasn't one of revenge, but of reclamation, reclaiming her identity, her power, and her life from the shadow of another's ego. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many of us are truly seeing the people in our lives for who they are? What did you think of Amelia's ultimate test? Was it a stroke of genius or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of strength and resilience, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.